Okay. Uh-huh. Okay. Good evening, everyone. So this is probably gonna take me a minute because I have not done this before. And so maybe just if okay.
Hi.
Okay. Hi. So I seem to have gotten one person on board at least. There seems to be a bit of a problem right now because it shows that Ava is not able to join. I don't know why that's happening. Did you
Ooh.
face any issue,
No,
Ishita?
I just said request to join, and it was like, "Do you want to go live with Give Up?" I'm like, yeah, join.
Oh, okay. So maybe in the meantime, maybe she's having a bit of an internet issue. We can probably introduce ourselves. Oh, no, that worked. Hi, good
I think it
evening.
worked. Hi,
Hey, good evening.
good evening. How
Yeah,
are you girls doing?
I'm fine. How are you, Ishita?
I'm doing good. Very excited, but doing very good.
Yeah, we're all. How are you?
All good, thank you.
Okay.
Is everyone in?
Yeah, I think so. We can wait probably 2 more minutes, and in the meantime, while we wait, we can probably introduce ourselves. Um,
Sure.
so my name is Atyantaka. I am co-founder and director of the Red Lotus project, and we're the account that is currently doing the takeover on Give Her Five. It's been a great opportunity. We've had the account yesterday and the whole of today, and we'll be handing it over tomorrow. So we thought it would be a great idea to end the takeover in conversation with Ava. So probably you can introduce yourself now.
Hi everyone. So I'm Ava Khan. I'm studying a Bachelor of Health Sciences, majoring in health and infectious diseases at the University of Sydney. And I'm really excited to be talking with you guys today to be touching on the subject of sustainable menstruation and PCOS as well. So I'd just like to thank you girls for having me here, and also I'd like to thank Give Her Five for this great opportunity. So yeah.
Yeah, and we also have Ishita from the Red Lotus.
Hi, I'm Ashita. I'm one of the co-founders for the Red Lotus.
Yeah, so I think we have around 16 people now, so I think we can start easing into the conversation. So, as Ava mentioned, we'll be talking today a bit about her experiences and just a general conversation on sustainable menstruation. And we'll also be touching on a topic we at the Red Lotus are not very familiar with and haven't really covered. That is hormonal disorders such as PCOS and PCOD. So, just general background before we get into that part of the conversation. How do you, so we at the Red Lotus, we're big on sustainable menstruation. We have our own outlook about it. How do you perceive sustainable menstruation?
So I think sustainable menstruation in itself is such a broad term, not really easy to define. But for me, it would definitely mean, using eco-friendly menstrual products as well as disposing menstrual waste correctly. Because I think these days, kudos to influencers on Instagram, people are more aware about using eco-friendly menstrual products. People do know what menstrual cups are, how to use them to some extent. But people don't really realize that you also have to kind of address the disposal of menstrual waste, right? So whether it's biodegradable or non-biodegradable, there is a particular way in which you need to dispose your waste in order to be environmentally conscious. So yeah, that's my take.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty, and I think Ashita would be inclined to agree. Very similar
Yeah.
in the way we perceive sustainable menstruation is that there are two aspects of it, that you can use eco-friendly products like menstrual cups and cloth pads, but then if you can't, you can still do your bit by properly disposing of your menstrual waste. So I would say, yeah, we that's pretty much in line with what we think as well. So, Ishita, if you would like to ask a question.
So, my question is that do you think that sustainable menstruation is something that needs to be talked about more, an issue that needs more attention? Because we hear a lot about, period poverty and inaccessibility to these products, but we never really hear what happens to them after we've acquired them, after we've used them. So,
Yeah, for sure. A lot of us are very, or we claim to be very climate conscious, and a lot of us genuinely care about climate change. But, and sometimes you can have this kind of idea that, oh, I care about climate change, but how am I gonna kind of help, or how am I gonna be a part of the climate change movement? And this is a pretty easy way to do it. So I definitely think this needs to be talked about more, because sustainability is so important. And in the coming few years, we really don't know what's going to happen to the planet because of all the waste we generate. And again, I think that even now, like, because menstruation has so much stigma attached to it, particularly in low income countries like India, in lots of African countries. I think that people kind of find it hard to talk about menstruation in itself, and sustainable menstruation kind of comes later. But it definitely is a subject that needs to be broached, that needs to be talked about. So, yeah.
Yeah, and you're, um, very on point with that, how much we all want to be a part of the movement against climate change. Yet it's sort of hard for everyone to realize how much of a problem it really is. Like today, we were putting a quiz on the Give Her Five story, and one of the questions we asked is how much waste, how much plastic waste do you think the menstrual products generate in a year? And the answer was like 9,000 tons, which in itself is just
It's a
a
lot, yeah.
ginormous. That's a lot of plastic just from menstrual products. And when you tie that in with all the other plastic in the world, it's just an insane number. Uh, so yeah, that is something I think that is universal, I would say. So
For sure.
now talking about universal, what are and I would just like to add that my internet seems to be really shaky. So if I just go off, I don't really know what will happen to the live. Will this continue happening? I'm not really sure. So if that happens, Ishita, please take over. But we are talking about universal terms. We're talking about sort of a global movement against climate change. But we all have our personal experiences related to it as well. Like we at the Red Lotus, the entire idea was born on like a total chance visit to our local waste segregation plant, not expected. So it was a personal experience that actually facilitated the entire thing. So have you had any personal experiences with the improper disposal of menstrual waste?
Yeah, for sure. I think an experience that is common to a lot of menstruators is particularly the improper disposal of waste in schools or educational settings, because this is something that happens so often. Again, because of stigma, people aren't really ready to address that this is where the problem is and this is how you need to solve it. People kind of shy away from it. And personally, even when I was in school, I did my schooling in Iran. When I was there, it wasn't much of an issue. But definitely, when I was in India, uh, there were a lot of issues that came up even when I was in the seventh grade, eighth grade. And teachers would specifically instruct, you know, like the girls would be bunched up and the teachers would give instructions that please do not flush your menstrual waste down like down toilets, right? Because that is something that happens so much in India. It's crazy. In a lot of low income and middle income countries, people aren't really aware that this is not the way you need to dispose waste. Maybe it's out of stigma, maybe it's out of shame, because a lot of people do feel a lot of shame. But obviously, people dispose menstrual waste in the wrong way, and this is obviously harmful, right? In school, people would flush menstrual waste down the drain, and that would obviously end up clogging the drains, and someone would have to come and, fish it out. And that too, like this too in itself causes so much harm to the environment, because whenever, with regards to sewage and drain, people like you have natural decomposers, right? So microorganisms that kind of work through all this material. But when you dispose your waste incorrectly, you're causing them harm as well. Dis- you're kind of shaking the ecological balance. So yeah, this is definitely an experience I've had multiple times when I was in school, when I was a young girl, and
Yeah, we seem to have issue that happened for you as well, or is it
Yeah,
my
yeah.
experience? Last
It
part
was
was a
for a
bit
bit.
shaky. Uh-huh. But yeah, as a whole, I would say all of us over here have had that sort of experience at schools, at public places in general. And okay, there are a few questions rolling in. I don't know if I'm doing this right, but I would say, and the entire thing around stigma as well. But I would also say that there is a general element of unawareness. Like you don't realize that, as you mentioned, you're shaking the entire ecological balance. When you're in that position, and like I mentioned, just the Red Lotus, we walked in, had no idea such a thing even existed. But once you start putting into perspective how, how even one small domino can set off such a big effect, then it really puts into perspective how big of an issue it is, and even as you mentioned, how it can harm the natural cycle of events as well. So I think again, I think everyone over here has gone through that sort of experience. Ishita?
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask, it's very common in schools, but that's because, at the end they're like young menstruators, right? But it is, from what I have heard from other women who work, is that it also happens in offices a lot, which is a lot more sad to hear because these are grown women, which means that at some point the education that we're getting on this topic is not enough, because every time they take us
Yeah.
into, they separate the girls and the boys when they're talking about this. They take the girls and they're like, oh, don't flush it, don't do this to it, but they don't tell us what are we actually supposed to do with it. So yeah, my question is that, do you have any experience like that outside of school, basically improper disposal?
Not really. I would say that's because I consider myself to be on the privileged side of society, right? We're all privileged members of society. So for us to see things like this would definitely be uncommon. But for other people who work in different settings, I'm sure it's pretty common to see this happening every day. And again, the point you made about education, that's like on spot, But the thing is that, are there resources for proper waste disposal? Because that also kind of makes, or it kind of accounts for something, right? Because a lot of even in school, when this would happen, a lot of uh, I'm sorry, just the questions keep popping up, can't focus. Yeah, but
Yeah.
in schools, a lot of
No, go ahead.
people know that this is a problem, but what are institutions doing about it? It's not just about education. Is there a proper, area or a proper way to dispose menstrual waste? Have they kept something? where people can, go and it's easy for them to understand and they can actually dispose their waste easily. Again, it comes down to organizations and institutions as well. Of course, awareness does count, but unless resources are not made available to menstruators, they can't really know what they're doing wrong and how to correct this. So, yeah, that's my take.
So essentially, it's just one big cycle, and as Ishita, as you mentioned, the entire stigma and separation, but it also has a lot to do with how this is not something that we are educated on at the grassroots level. And you spoke
Mm-hmm.
about resources as well. So
Mm-hmm.
the lack of education and the lack of resources in addition to it really sort of propagates the problem more, to
Mm-hmm.
just basically summarize what both of you said.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's interesting. And as you mentioned, uh, like outside of school, I would say just in public washrooms, that sort of thing. If you walked in
Mm-hmm.
one, it's pretty common to see used sanitary pads around.
Mm-hmm.
And so that would again tie with the lack of sort of resources, because if you have those, I don't know what you call them, but you have those incinerators that you can dispose your
Mhm.
pad of right there and then on.
Mm-hmm.
Or I think I was just reading an article where they came up with these trash cans just especially for menstrual waste, and it was disposed of separately. That sort of thing, there's a lack of those sort of um, amenities in our country, in India.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that really sort of emphasizes the problem a bit more.
Mm-hmm.
So we had also mentioned. So my next question was going to be, why do you think there is such a lack of awareness about sustainable menstruation? But we've already covered lack of resources, lack of education at the grassroots level.
Yeah, I'd like to
Now
add a
you're
point though, if that's all right.
mm-hmm.
You
Yeah,
know,
yeah, go ahead.
in my opinion, I just think that talking about India, I feel that, in India, the society is so entrenched in tradition, in these old beliefs. Of course, I'm not saying it's wrong to be traditional, but to some extent, you kind of have to move past old beliefs and separate those from what's right and what's wrong. So in India, a lot of people are still entrenched in these traditional beliefs, and they that kind of adds in, or it kind of weighs into the whole problem. And again, about resources, you would see that there are so many campaigns, health promotion campaigns that keep occurring in India. Like, it's common to see campaigns on, let's say, diabetes, because that's such a common problem, and people feel that it like you need to talk about it. But then again, because of the traditional mindset in India, even though we are one of the countries which has the largest amount of menstruators in the world, because our population is so high and we have so many menstruators. uh, in spite of such a large number of people who menstruate, uh, institutions, governments, public policy campaigns, they don't really highlight they don't really highlight the concept of sustainable menstruation, because there is that stigma, associated with it in their heads. It comes like with tradition that, oh, when a woman is menstruating, she's not supposed to get involved in any religious activities. And this holds true for a lot of religions. So yeah, I would say that that also kind of weighs into the whole problem, because unless people don't sit down and start having comfortable conversations about menstruation itself, how will the topic of sustainable menstruation even come up? So, yeah.
Yeah, you mentioned, we have the largest population of menstruators. That it's ironic because that is one of the largest problems we will face to even achieve the ideal of sustainable menstruation. Because of this large population, people don't even have access to menstrual products, much less eco-friendly menstrual products. So it's
Mhm.
sort of counterproductive in that sense. Like you would hope that this large population would draw attention to this problem. Yet on the contrary, we're struggling more because of said large population. And you also mentioned government schemes, right? So,
Mhm.
Ishita, we were doing the webinar, right?
Yeah,
And we
it
were
was.
doing so much research. Mhm.
Yeah, no. I think it was in December 2020. The scheme that I think you're going to talk about. The
Yeah.
forget its name.
No,
Uh,
even I don't think there was a particular name, but it was announced that
Janaushadhi
but
Kendras in which you get Suvidha pads. They've been
yeah,
more subsidized once again. Earlier, one pad was for like 2 rupees 50 paise, and now it has been subsidized to 1 rupee per pad. And these are like biodegradable and you know available everywhere for a very
yeah,
cheap
Wow,
price.
that's really
yeah. So
nice.
I would say that there are schemes, but from what our research showed us, and from what we read, and I remember reading this quote from this particular article, that there are gaps in the government regulation supply. There is a lot of corruption. There's a lot of we are starting this and we're drawing media attention to it, but then when that media attention slowly fades away, what happens after that? Everybody moves on with their lives, but what exactly happened
True.
to the scheme, that nobody really knows after that.
Hmm.
So there are government schemes, for the matter of fact, but how effectively are they being put in place is the real question, I would say.
Hmm.
And yeah, you mentioned that we're in our country is very big on tradition and society, and well, gradual change is the way to go. You can't expect have one of the largest populations in the world.
Correct.
It's
Indeed, indeed.
it
Yeah.
is sort of silly to even expect that, as much as we may want it, that our entire country will be able to embrace something as
Huge
menstruation,
change.
even though
Yeah.
it's perfectly normal,
Yeah.
as much as you even want it to happen. So
Correct. Correct.
we've spoken about sustainable menstruation. We've spoken about the problems related to sustainable menstruation. And now we'll be heading into unknown territory that Ishita and I don't really know what we're talking about when it comes here. About PCOS and PCOD. Now, maybe you mentioned when we were having a conversation before this live and we were planning it out that you have PCOS, right? Am I right? Yeah.
PCOS. Yeah. It's
So
not
maybe.
called PCOD anymore because of the disease part
Mhm.
kind of stigmatizes it. So now
Oh.
it's called
Mhm.
PCOS. So yeah,
Oh,
spot on.
wow, you learn something new every day. So maybe before we start asking you some questions related to that, maybe you want to just explain exactly what it is.
Yeah, sure. So PCOS is a hormonal disorder in which I think this is common to only women. I'm not really sure if it happens to all menstruators, but in my experience, what happens is that you have these cysts that develop near your ovaries, and these cysts or kind of like follicles, they cause a lot of external and internal changes. So what it does, is that it basically delays your whole menstrual cycle. It delays the process of ovulation, and in some cases the ovulation doesn't even happen. That's in cases of severe PCOS or unmanaged PCOS. So a lot of young women, your lot of young girls have PCOS, but they don't really realize they have it. It has a lot of common symptoms which again we kind of brush off because we are told that no, this is normal. This is what happens when you're on your when you're getting your menstrual cycle. This is just normal, but it's actually not. So things like developing cystic acne or having intense menstrual cramps or unexplained weight gain. Now, a lot of us kind of relate this to just growing up, or no, we're women, this happens, this is normal, but it's actually not, and it's not really talked about because, again, there is a stigma attached to it, and people don't really realize they have it until they try and conceive. So that's when people realize that we've had this problem for 10, 15 years, and by then in most cases it's too late, and PCOS can be really dangerous if it's left unmanaged because it can lead to endometrial cancer. It causes active depression. So if you're someone who has PCOS, it can be really hard to manage your emotions, to think clearly sometimes. It's really hard to do that. So a lot of factors play in, and it has, a lot of detrimental effects if it's not managed, including the development of diabetes, which I know it's just a small word, but it is pretty scary to be, taking insulin shots every day, to have to monitor your glucose every day. So yeah, just a gist of PCOS. I can go into a lot of detail, but I think I'm going to save that for later.
Yeah. So, Ishita, maybe you want to ask the next question.
Yeah. So I just wanted to ask you, there is obviously a lack of education when it comes to hormonal disorders like PCOS. So I wanted to ask, does it affect your daily routine, like day-to-day life?
Oh, for sure. You know, sometimes you find it really hard to even manage your cravings or, you know, the food you're eating, because when you have PCOS, you kind of naturally have high blood glucose. So what happens with high blood glucose is that you kind of keep feeling this need to eat sugar or to consume carbs. And obviously, that can be really detrimental because eating carbs all day is in no way a part of a good or balanced diet. It can affect your sleep. Sometimes, for me personally, I find it really difficult to sleep sometimes. And it's not just because of university stress, which is what I thought it was, but it's definitely because you have underlying conditions that your body is kind of responding to. And again, physical activity is very, very important in PCOS, and a lot of people brush it off. And these days, if you were to even go to a gynecologist and you were diagnosed with PCOS, uh, earlier, let's say 3 to 4 years back, gynecologists would prescribe you with contraception and say, okay, you have to take this pill, you have to take that pill, and you're good to go. But now the awareness is definitely increasing, and people do understand that it can't be solved with medication. So PCOS can kind of be halted or managed in some way with medication, but it requires a lot of active effort. You need to exercise regularly, you need to eat better, you need to clean your palate, I would say. So yeah, that's my take on the whole PCOS thing.
Yeah. Um, so, as you mentioned, and this is something I think, you mentioned that it can be attributed to just during menstruation, it's
Mm,
normal, just puberty.
yeah.
Um, would you, so would you chalk that up to a general lack of awareness? And if you do think that it is because, just a general lack of awareness, and maybe it's like people know, but they don't really want to, would you say it is because of a general lack of awareness, or it's that people are aware of such syndromes or such disorders, yet talked about stigma as well, but are too, I don't want to say the word ashamed, but are too afraid of sort of
Mm-hmm.
admitting to themselves that this is something that I might have, even though, modern medication, you mentioned that now people are, there is, now as awareness is spreading about such disorders, and that there are things that can be done.
Mm-hmm.
Or do you think it's like, a mix of both? And if so, how do you think people and, young menstruators in our country can, how can we increase awareness about this sort of
Mm-hmm.
thing?
Yeah, for
Okay, my
sure.
question was global.
No, no, no. I
Yeah.
think I got it. But I definitely think it's a mix of both. So, lack of
Mhm.
awareness, and also the fact that a lot of women don't want to accept that this is something that is happening to them, because obviously it can be hard to accept such a huge fact, you know. For someone who loves sugar so much, I mean, if you ask me to eat waffles for every single day of my life, I could do that. But for me, it was really hard to kind of accept that, like, I have to modulate my diet now. Like, I have to kind of control what I'm eating. And not just that, it's, uh, as I said, unmanaged PCOS can lead to a lot of problems: endometrial cancer, depression, diabetes. And one of the major things it can lead to is infertility. So, a lot of people are not really ready to accept that, you know, this is something that we may have to face head on. And if I'm being very frank, this is something I felt myself, that, you know, the first thought I had was, how could this even happen? And, you know, it could lead to so many problems. And sometimes it can get hard to modulate your diet or watch what you're eating. But in the end, you have to, like, remember that it can cause so many issues. And another thing is, a lot of women are diagnosed with PCOS in their late 20s to early 30s. So I think by convention, at least in India, this is kind of the age where women look to conceive or look to kind of settle, you know, or have a child. Uh, and by the time they are diagnosed, like 28, 30, late 30s, it's too late, because now your ovaries have kind of stopped functioning properly because you've not managed it for all these years. I mean, if you don't manage a disease for 10 to 12 years, of course it's going to harm you. And I see in the comment someone has mentioned that, do you suggest that girls should get themselves tested? And this is something I really, really stress on. So if anyone watching or will watch, if you have a painful menstrual cycle, if you have uh, certain symptoms, if you have an irregular menstrual cycle accompanied by cystic acne, accompanied by weight gain, all these little things, you must get tested. You must get hormone serum tests done. You must get an ultrasound done, because it's better that you kind of figure it out early, right? So you can actively manage it and prevent the harm that may come your way. But if you kind of, a lot of people, you know, as we were talking about stigma, a lot of people brush it off and say that this is something that is so normal. And in fact, a lot of us are even told by our elders that, no, your menstrual cycle is supposed to be painful. It's like, it's just how it is. But in fact, it's not. Your cycle should not be extremely painful or unbearable. That's how you know that there is a problem.
Mhm. So, how would you suggest that awareness be increased? You mentioned, you just brought up that when a lot of women are diagnosed, it's too late. So, would you suggest that this is something that is spoken and stressed more about in schools during the age period when such a syndrome, such a disorder can be caught and effectively be treated?
For sure, schools, universities, because, you know, the thing is with PCOS, it doesn't really show up until you're 16, 17. That's when it really starts showing up. So it's not that PCOS develops over age. Women who have PCOS are born with it. It's not that, you know, a bad diet has kind of caused you to develop it. That's not how it works. You're born with it. It's a syndrome and you're born with it. And I think awareness should be spread. The first thing that schools and educational institutions should talk about is the fact that your menstrual cycle is not supposed to be extremely painful, period. Because that's where the problem starts. People keep kind of believing that this is natural, this is something that has to happen. But unless they're not told that this needs to be corrected or you need to go get checked, people won't really know. So I think schools and educational institutions should definitely, start campaigns or programs, or even PCOS counts as sexual health, right? So just sex education could benefit people so much. They could learn so many things, and PCOS is very very common now. Lot of celebrities have it. Sonam Kapoor has it. I think Victoria Beckham also has it, and it's very very common. So 1 in 3 women have PCOS, and which definitely means that it needs to be talked about. So yeah.
Yeah, sounds sounds very terrifying. So, you hope that such awareness is created and
Mhm.
you are able to sort of catch it before it can
Early,
get
yeah,
bad.
true.
So, we've talked about sustainable menstruation, we've talked about PCOS. Now, when we were starting this project, we weren't really sure who we were targeting. And I don't think I can say that I knew with full confidence what PCOS was. Ishita, did you know? Or am I just
I
no,
did not
right?
know.
So yeah, I think that itself is sort of testimony to the fact that this needs to be talked about more because they are all over the internet all the time. And if
Mhm.
you can't find anything about it in that stratosphere, then you know that there is a problem getting that sort of awareness out. But anyway, what do you think about using, in general, there is a sort of stigma around products such as menstrual cups and, it'll break your hymen, that sort of thing.
Mhm.
What do you think about using these products like menstrual cups, cloth pads, while having PCOS? Can you do that?
Yeah, for sure. Actually, this is something that you should do if you have PCOS, because people who have PCOS commonly have a very heavy flow. So, heavy bleeding is kind of associated with PCOS. And obviously, the more you bleed, the more waste you're generating. So, an average woman would go through, I don't know, I'm guessing 20, 15 to 20 sanitary pads per cycle, right? Maybe that's too less. I can't put a finger on it. But if you have PCOS, just double that amount. So you can imagine how much waste you're generating. And obviously, I'm not saying this is the person's fault, but of course, you kind of need to take active steps to reduce the waste you're generating. And menstrual cups and cloth pads are a great option. They're a great alternative for disposable pads because, again, as your poll suggested, or your quiz suggested on Giver 5, 90% of all disposable menstrual products are made of plastic, which is a lot. So there is definitely no harm in using menstrual cups or cloth pads. It's just a matter of mindset, I would say. And I think a lot of people do think that, oh, it'll break my hymen or something like that. But this is just a reminder that virginity, again, is a social construct. This is just a construct that has kind of evolved because of the male dominated society that we live in. And there's literally nothing wrong with using these products. I know a lot of friends whom I don't think I can name because I haven't taken their consent, but definitely I have a lot of friends who actively use menstrual products, and they've told me about it and talked about how it's been such a great change for them. Because again, the ease with menstrual cups is that you don't have to keep buying them again and again. So it's just one, and it can last you for a long time. So 5 to 10 years sometimes. And the only thing is, you kind of need to handle these products with a lot of care, Because again, here the problem is that while people may be open to using these products, people are scared about hygiene, right? People are worried because obviously, if you don't use a menstrual cup in the right way, if you do not clean it, it can cause problems. It can, kind of worsen your interiors, I would say. So that is something, this is also something that needs to be stressed upon. People need to talk about how to use them correctly, how to use them with the correct hygiene practices. And I think if people can kind of wrap their heads around that, then it's pretty easy and they're good to go, I would say.
Yeah. It's good to know that, everybody can sort of do their bit in becoming a sustainable and more responsible menstruator. Not just
That's
your,
right.
a person who does not have, who does not suffer from this syndrome, but everybody can. So that's good to know. And,
True.
you know, and it is something that, it's a sort of interesting cross section between between sustainable menstruation and PCOS. It was something that we not really even thought about before we started having this conversation. And I think that's something we at the Red Lotus can do our bit in talking more about that. It doesn't matter. Despite having PCOS, you can still do your bit. Your sense of civic duty.
True.
Somebody mentioned in the comments that it's also like you're being a responsible person, and you also have a sense of civic duty, because you mentioned 90% plastic each and every pad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when you have a heavy flow, you can do your bit as well. So that's good to know.
Yeah.
um
Um, I I think there was a question up there about sustainable products. I'm just scrolling through the
yeah, there was a
comments.
question. I thought there was one question in like the question box thing, and there was one in the comments as well, that how do you suggest we use these eco-friendly products? Somebody in the comments, there was also a bit about, mothers are very apprehensive about letting
Yeah,
their daughter use such.
yeah. The question was, how
Yeah,
do young teenagers switch to sustainable menstrual products, especially when mothers, like the older generation, have reservations about this concept.
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
That
yeah.
is the question.
Um, I mean, I would say that the first step in this is removing that mind block, which a lot of people have, that this
Mhm.
is wrong. Because again, with all respect to the previous generation or our parents' generation, I would say that a lot of people are kind of thinking or kind of looking at it from the traditional sense. So, and this is something that you just hear that, oh, you can't really use menstrual cups or you can't use cloth pads. It's harmful because this is something that people, I would say, these are rumors or these aren't really supported by science. And obviously, something that is not really supported as a hard fact is what commonly circulates in media these days. People kind of engage the most with content that isn't really factually correct. So it can be hard as someone who's not a part of this generation to kind of open up to that ideal. And as you said, these things take time. So I think gradually approaching the subject and taking, making an active attempt to like read up and learn about the topic and learn about how sustainable choices can be implemented is the first thing you can do. And uh, if the user who asked the question is still with us, if you're still feeling skeptical, why don't you consult a medical professional? Because virtually there is no medical professional on this planet who would say that you shouldn't use sustainable menstrual products. If you still aren't really confident about this whole approach, you should definitely consult a medical professional or a gynecologist and just have a general conversation with them. Have a general conversation about how this works, and maybe this will help them open up and help them kind of uh, I guess, match up to today's ideals, I would say. So it's
Yeah,
all about
because
information. Yeah, go ahead.
because the moment it's backed up by science, it's a whole lot more, feels like it's a
Correct.
whole lot more approachable. That's something I was going to mention as well. Is that the moment you have scientific proof and scientific thought behind something, like we know that menstruation is simply a biological process, but as you
Mm-hmm.
mentioned, rumors, myths, that sort of thing is largely perpetuated
Mm-hmm.
by a way of thinking that has existed in our country for a very long time. But the
Mm-hmm.
moment you have science and more, and you have people who have the experience to tell you that this is simply a biological process, sustainable menstruation is the way to go, you feel a lot more
Mm-hmm.
confident in approaching these things. Because
Yeah,
it's understandable why you mentioned the older generations would be apprehensive, because that's what they've been told. And
correct.
once you have that thinking, it's very hard to get rid of that. But so,
Mm-hmm.
just to, how would you suggest that apprehensive mothers, or that they should allow their daughters or their children to switch over to sustainable period products? Right on, you should just consult with a gynecologist, because as you mentioned, anybody
Yeah,
in science would tell you the same.
correct.
So I think the last question we would probably want to touch on before we end the conversation. It's a very large problem. You mentioned
Mm-hmm.
1 in 3 women have PCOS. We have the largest population in the world. So many people menstruate. There's a whole problem with accessibility to period products. Just
Mm-hmm.
forget. Then sustainable menstruation is kind of last on that long list of issues we have to address before we even, when it comes to menstruation in our country. But you start from yourself.
Correct.
What would you suggest every individual who's watching? We're recording this, so we'll put this on our channel as well. How would you suggest the person watching this does their bit to ensure that they are a more responsible menstruator as a whole, a more aware menstruator?
Mm-hmm. So I think the first thing would be consider the choices you have on the table, right? Because a lot of us, myself, I wasn't really inclined to use sustainable menstrual products because I was just so used to using disposable pads that I really didn't want to make the switch. But you, at some point, you kind of have to sit down and think about the options you are being given. And you can also look at it from a very economical aspect because when you buy a
Mhm.
menstrual cup, you're also doing your wallet a favor, you're also doing the environment a favor, and you're also virtually doing your body a favor, right? I mean, most of us as students, as young professionals, uh, we're always, going about our work or going about our lives. And as a menstruator, it can be annoying to keep changing your disposable pad or your tampon again and again, so every 4 to 6 hours. But menstrual cups can, I think, they can last for about 10 to 12 hours. So you don't
Yes.
need to keep changing them again and again. And another thing is that people should kind of open up that, okay, if I cannot make the switch, if I'm not able to switch to sustainable menstrual products, then what can I do? And in this case, that would definitely be disposal, right? So disposing your waste correctly can also make a huge impact. And I think people should kind of make it a practice to separate their menstrual waste. So if you're a menstruator, you can have a trash can or a waste bin essentially only for your menstrual waste and nothing else. Because when we had a conversation before this, and you mentioned how when you started the Red Lotus project, you visited what was it? A sanitary,
Segregation.
yeah, it was a segregation plant, yeah. And you saw, physically saw people separating menstrual waste. So why is it that you are kind of subjecting as a menstruator? Why is it that you're you're subjecting these sanitation workers to things you can do just as easily at home. How hard is it to just dispose your menstrual waste correctly? Agreed that some of us may find it hard to switch. It can be a big decision for some people. But again, if you can't do that, the next best thing is just to dispose your waste correctly. And as I mentioned earlier, if you're someone who is skeptical about menstrual products, sustainable menstrual products, please consult your gynecologist or a medical professional who can kind of, support the thought that these products are safe to use and, in fact, better. So yeah, I think it starts with making active decisions yourself. You can't really push other people to make a decision if they don't want to. But if you kind of sit down and think about it and consider the options you have, especially as a privileged individual, then there's a lot of good you can bring. So yeah.
Yeah, I think that sounds great. And one other way, you can do your bit is to just start talking about it.
True.
This conversation itself, we've all learned so much. We're all going to walk away. As you mentioned, it forces us to sort of think about our actions. You mentioned the waste segregation plant. I was the one who visited. I walked in, and it
Mm-hmm.
was like, reality hits you like a brick in that moment. Because
Mm-hmm.
until you realize how prevalent of an issue this is, you talk about 9,000 tons. How large is 9,000 tons when you Google it and you think about it? It's a very, very large number. When you walk into a waste segregation plant and you see sanitation workers forcibly having to separate menstrual waste with their bare hands, you think about the fact that this is happening in front of you. How are you going to contribute as a human being, as an individual of this planet? How can you do your bit to sort of reduce the strain that has been caused upon this community, our environment? So yeah, starting a conversation itself, again, I would just like to add in, is just a huge step in that direction.
Completely
So
agree.
yeah, I think, you know, I think I've learned a lot today. I know Ishita has also learned a lot today. I hope so.
All
Yeah,
of us have.
and yeah, all of us have. It was an
I I
interesting
have
conversation.
I have one tiny nugget of knowledge to contribute. You said, how much can 9,000 tons be? And I don't know why I know this, but I checked it again, and that is about four-fifths the weight of the Eiffel Tower. So
Hmm.
every year, menstruators contribute four-fifths the weight of Eiffel Towers to trash, to
Yeah,
waste,
and
to
the
plastic.
thing is that it's just that is documented waste. Just think, and it's
Hmm.
obvious we're not going to get all of
Correct.
it. So the number is probably going to be like, so I don't want to give like a specific number because I can be way off, but much, much, much larger than that. And
Correct.
that's crazy to think about, because when you say four-fifths of the Eiffel Tower, that really puts into perspective to me how much waste there is in this. When you look at your sanitary
Hmm.
pad and you think, oh wait, 90% of this is plastic, and I go through
Plastic.
20 to 30 of these in one cycle. How much plastic am I really producing? The answer is a
Hmm.
lot. So,
Hmm.
it's incredible to think about, but it's also incredible to actually see how much you can do. The effort that you
Hmm.
can make is actually very considerable, and it's good to know you can
Hmm.
make those efforts regardless of if you have a syndrome, you know and everybody can do their bit. That's good to know.
Hmm.
So I think,
Yeah.
yeah, we've all learned a lot. Everybody who attended this live learned a lot, and it's been great, and it's a great way to end this takeover as well. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you for
It was
having
great
me.
having you. Yeah.
Yeah, we learned a
So
lot.
yeah. So now I'm going to have to figure out how we end this. Okay, wait. Does anybody have any questions? I don't think so. Maybe
Um,
there are questions, and I can't
I'm
see
trying.
100%.
I'm trying to scroll up. Mm.
No, that was the only question I saw, and I was keeping an eye
Yeah.
on the comments and everything. I don't think there were more questions.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Um,
I think Manasvi answered like the questions.
yeah,
Manasvi is our other co-founder, our final co-founder for the Red Lotus. So I think she answered some of the questions in the chat.
yeah. So anyway, I think you can always reach out to the Red Lotus, give her five, and to you for any
For
questions. I think
sure.
everybody would be always happy to
Yeah.
answer them. But anyway, thank you for joining us. Have a good
Thank
night,
you. You
and have
too.
a
Bye
good
bye.
night to everybody who joined as well.
Bye.
So, okay, how do I end this? Okay, I got it. Bye. Good night. Bye,
Bye.
everyone.
Good night.